When I first arrived at Springfield Grove, the neighborhood looked like a postcard: manicured lawns, symmetrical flower beds, and neat rows of pastel houses with white picket fences. Friendly faces peeked out from behind lace curtains, and the air seemed thick with suburban tranquility. I'd been searching for a peaceful place to continue my work and, truth be told, to decompress from the high-pressure environment of hospital corridors and conference rooms. As the recently elected president of the State Cardiology Association, my schedule had been packed with hospital visits, legislative meetings on healthcare policy, and public awareness campaigns about heart health. My hope was that Springfield Grove would give me the breathing space I needed, a quiet retreat from the frenetic pace of my professional life. But in a strange twist of irony, the biggest challenge I would face in Springfield Grove had nothing to do with coronary diseases or heart research. Instead, it involved a self-appointed monarch of the neighborhood, Phoebe Arneson, known around the community by the exasperated nickname Karen. I first noticed her as I stood outside my new house, wearing paint-stained jeans and a t-shirt, directing the movers who carried in my furniture. Karen hovered at the edge of my driveway, sporting pressed slacks and a pastel sweater set, her arms folded tight against her chest. She regarded my boxes with suspicion, almost as though I was importing contraband rather than a coffee table and a few shelves. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, stepping forward with a polite smile that felt more like a cross-examination. "I'm Phoebe Arneson, but everyone calls me Karen." She adjusted the ID badge on a lanyard that read Springfield Grove Homeowners Association, President. Her tone was cordial enough on the surface, but there was a steeliness to her gaze that suggested she was already judging me by how many of my belongings were still on the driveway. "Thank you," I replied, setting down a box labeled Kitchen. "I'm Dr. Stephen Malone. Just moved in today." She had the box. "Doctor, you say? Interesting. I hope you're aware that Springfield Grove has specific guidelines regarding yard maintenance, exterior colors, and community property usage. I trust you've read through the entire HOA rulebook?" Yes, I have. It's extensive," I said, trying to sound diplomatic. "I'll make sure to follow all the rules." Karen gave a clipped nod. "See that you do? We take them very seriously." And with that, she spun around, marched off, and left me with the distinct impression that I was being put on probation before I'd even unpacked a single plate. At the time, I chalked it up to overzealousness, a common trait among certain HOA heads. Little did I know the kind of chaos this woman could unleash, or that her meddling would strike at the heart, quite literally, of everything I worked for. Over the next few weeks, I settled into my new home. The weather was mild, and I spent some evenings walking the winding streets of Springfield Grove. Neighbors were mostly polite, albeit reserved. A few who were friendlier warned me with hushed voices to watch out for Karen. "She means well, but she micromanages everything," one elderly neighbor whispered, glancing around as though Karen might materialize from the hedges. "Last year, she fined a family because they hung wind chimes that weren't on the approved list." I laughed it off at first, but I soon learned how extensive the HOA's influence was. They had rules covering everything from the color of curtains visible from the street to the permissible times for mowing the lawn. Some of it seemed overly restrictive, but as long as it preserved the peace, I figured it was a harmless quirk of suburban life. That changed when I came across the first sign that Springfield Grove possessed something unusual: a set of community automated external defibrillators, AEDs. These bright orange boxes were mounted on the exterior walls of common buildings, such as the clubhouse and the neighborhood pool house, where anyone could access them in an emergency. The presence of AEDs caught my eye immediately. I was impressed that a suburban community recognized the importance of quick cardiac intervention. Each AED unit was in a locked cabinet labeled "For emergency use only." A sign below it read, "Provided by Springfield Grove HOA in partnership with St. Catherine's Hospital." As a cardiologist, I felt a sense of relief. Cardiac arrest can strike anyone, at any age. Quick access to defibrillators can be the difference between life and death. That evening, I asked a neighbor, an accountant named Victor Martinez, about the AEDs. He shrugged, saying, "The board installed them a couple of years ago after an elderly resident collapsed from a heart attack on the tennis courts. They claimed it was part of a safety initiative." In all my years of visiting communities, I had rarely seen HOAs proactive enough to invest in multiple AEDs. "That's actually commendable," I said. Do they maintain them regularly? Victor made a face. They used to. But Karen is the head of the HOA now. And from what I hear, she's not too keen on the expense of restocking parts or paying for inspections. We'll see how it goes. His words stuck with me. As someone intimately familiar with the life-saving potential of AEDs, I silently hoped the HOA would keep them in good shape. Little did I know that Karen's meddling would soon put them in jeopardy. My first mandatory HOA meeting arrived about a month after I moved in. The meeting was held in a medium-sized, multi-purpose room in the community clubhouse, with rows of folding chairs facing a long table. Behind that table sat Karen and 3 other board members, each with a neatly labeled binder. Residents trickled in, wearing expressions that ranged from bored to anxious. I took a seat near the front, wanting a better view of Karen's show of authority. The meeting began with Karen rapping a gavel against the table. "Good evening, Springfield Grove residents," she said in an officious tone. "Let's come to order. First on the agenda is landscaping fines." There followed a painfully detailed recitation of which homes had slightly overgrown hedges, who had unsanctioned garden gnomes, and so on. Then came updates on pool maintenance, plans for a summer barbecue, and budget summaries that revolved around small community improvements, fixing potholes, repainting fences, etc. Finally, Karen reached an agenda item labeled medical equipment budget. She flipped through her binder. "It has come to our attention that the cost of maintaining certain emergency devices is rising. We need to discuss whether we should continue funding them." A handful of neighbors looked confused. One woman in the audience, a retired nurse, asked, "Are you talking about the AEDs? The defibrillators?" Karen nodded, her expression neutral. "Correct. The annual maintenance fees have grown steep, particularly for replacement batteries and pads. We need to consider if these units are actually necessary, given how seldom they've been used. After all, we pay for local ambulance services and are close to a hospital." I tensed in my seat. Several neighbors exchanged worried looks. An older man named Franklin stood up. "Karen, those defibrillators saved Tom Walker's life last year. If we'd waited for the ambulance, he might not be here today." Karen forced a thin smile. "I'm not dismissing their usefulness outright, but we need to weigh cost against benefit. Also, our insurance rates might go up if we keep them. I've been in touch with the provider, and it's not cheap to maintain them properly." I couldn't remain silent any longer. I stood, introducing myself. "I'm Dr. Stephen Malone. I'm a cardiologist and actually the president of the State Cardiology Association. Defibrillators are crucial in cardiac emergencies. Every second counts. The cost is minimal compared to a life saved." A hush settled over the room, and all eyes fell on me. I noticed Karen's eyebrows shoot up ever so slightly. She hadn't known about my background. Clearing her throat, she replied, "That's certainly an interesting perspective, Dr. Malone. However, we also have to be responsible about community funds. If few people are using them, it might be better to remove them altogether rather than pay for equipment that expires or decays." My patience was already wearing thin. In my professional opinion, removing AEDs would be an enormous risk to the community. Just because you're close to a hospital doesn't mean you should gamble with those precious minutes. I strongly advise we keep them maintained. Karen pursed her lips. "Thank you for your input, doctor. We'll take it under advisement." Moving on, she abruptly ended the discussion, ignoring further objections. As the meeting concluded, a wave of unease rippled through the residents. I overheard anxious whispers. Is she really going to get rid of them? And what if someone else collapses? That night, I left the clubhouse with my heart pounding, a mix of frustration and dread swirling in my chest. I had a grim feeling that Karen was about to make a profoundly dangerous decision. True to form, Karen wasted no time flexing her perceived authority. Just days after the HOA meeting, I decided to take an early morning jog. As I passed by the clubhouse, I noticed a large sign taped to the front door. "Notice: the automated external defibrillator, AED, units have been removed for reevaluation. For medical emergencies, please dial 911. My stomach twisted. I jogged around to where one of the AEDs had been mounted. It was gone. The bracket that once held the bright orange box was empty. Heart pounding, I sprinted around the neighborhood, checking every location I knew of: the pool house, the tennis courts, the walking trail's entrance kiosk. All the AEDs had vanished. When I asked around, neighbors told me they saw a van from a private company the previous evening. men loading the AEDs into the back. No official announcements had been sent out beforehand. Karen had apparently decided to remove them without community-wide consent. Incensed, I stormed over to Karen's house, a prim two-story with a perfectly manicured lawn. By then it was mid-morning. She answered the door wearing her usual pastel sweater and a composed smile that instantly grated on my nerves. "Karen, you removed the AEDs?" I demanded, barely containing my anger. She nodded calmly, as though discussing something as mundane as the weather. They were costing the HOA too much in maintenance. Besides, as I said, we're minutes from a hospital. It's not as though we're in a remote area. I couldn't believe her casual tone. AEDs are a first line of defense for cardiac arrest. I've personally witnessed them save countless lives. How can you disregard that for some budget line item? Karen's smile tightened. "Doctor, I understand you feel strongly, but you must realize not everyone shares your professional obsession with these devices. Our neighborhood resources are limited. We'll be fine." "Fine? People's lives are at stake. You can't just—" Karen's voice rose a notch, sharpened by condescension. "I can and I did. As president of the HOA, I'm responsible for community finances. If that includes removing expensive equipment that few people use, so be it. Good day, doctor." Before I could retort, she closed the door in my face. Stepping off her porch, my mind swirled. This was no minor dispute about fence height or trash can placement. This was a decision that could get someone killed, and I wasn't going to let it stand. Determined to stop Karen, I called an impromptu meeting at my house for the following weekend, inviting all neighbors who were concerned about the AED removal. I put up flyers at the mailboxes, posted in the community's social media group, and personally knocked on doors. The response was overwhelming. Nearly 30 residents crowded into my living room that Saturday, anxious expressions on their faces. Among them were older individuals with heart conditions, parents of children with congenital issues, even a young couple who'd lost a family member to sudden cardiac arrest years earlier. Their stories poured out, fueling collective anger toward Karen's unilateral decision. "I know these machines are expensive to maintain," I began, "but they're essential. A single AED can double or even triple someone's chance of survival during a sudden cardiac arrest, especially if paramedics are more than a few minutes away." An older woman named Margaret raised her hand. "My husband has a pacemaker. If it malfunctions, or if his heart goes into an abnormal rhythm, that defibrillator could save him. Please, we have to get them back." Victor Martinez chimed in. "Karen argues that the cost is too high, but let's be real. The HOA budget is more than enough to cover these devices if we prioritize them." A hush fell as Franklin, the man who had earlier mentioned Tom Walker's life being saved, stood up. "We owe it to our neighbors to fight this. We can't let one person's arbitrary decision endanger everyone." By the time the meeting ended, we had formed an action committee dedicated to reinstating the AEDs. Victor volunteered to look into the HOA's bylaws, searching for loopholes or procedures that could challenge Karen's authority. Another neighbor, who was a paralegal, offered to draft a petition demanding an emergency HOA vote on the matter. I, meanwhile, promised to reach out to local media and healthcare organizations to raise awareness. The plan was bold, and the mood was determined. Yet none of us realized how far Karen would go to maintain her stranglehold on the neighborhood's healthcare decisions, or that her next move would be even more sinister than simply removing life-saving devices. Our newly formed committee worked tirelessly. Within days, we gathered over 100 signatures from Springfield Grove residents, all demanding that the defibrillators be returned. We scheduled a special HOA meeting, as stipulated in the bylaws. If enough homeowners signed a petition, the board was required to convene. But Karen, sensing a mutiny, pushed back. She started a disinformation campaign, sending out mass emails and social media posts claiming that the AED units had been faulty or outdated, that professional medical advice suggested their removal. She insisted that public liability concerns made it unwise to reinstall them without extensive legal reviews. Worse still, neighbors reported intimidation tactics. Some found threatening notes on their doors, reminding them that HOA fines and penalties could be enforced for non-compliance with community rules. A few even received cryptic phone calls late at night, breathing heavily into the receiver before hanging up. Though no direct proof pointed to Karen, the pattern was clear enough. Then came a bombshell revelation. Victor discovered, in the HOA's financial statements that the defibrillators had been purchased with a substantial grant from St. Catherine's Hospital. Under the terms of that grant, the devices could only be removed with the hospital's explicit approval, or else the funds had to be returned in full. This condition was meant to ensure that life-saving equipment wouldn't be removed arbitrarily. However, in a cunning maneuver, Karen had arranged for the HOA to repay the unused portion of the grant quietly, effectively freeing the board from that obligation. She had used the HOA's emergency reserve fund to do so. That alone might have been grounds for an investigation, as it wasn't a typical emergency expense. Yet she'd slid it through with minimal oversight, citing ambiguous cost overruns. At the next informal meeting of our committee, Victor slammed the financial records onto my dining table. "This is bigger than we thought," he said, frustration etched on his face. She used HOA funds to repay the hospital's grant. Technically, that means the board can remove the AEDs at will now, unless we can prove wrongdoing or get the board to reverse course. I felt a surge of anger. So she circumvented the hospital's conditions and made it look legal on paper? Exactly. That's appalling, I hissed. She's not just ignoring the community's voice. She's undermining public safety for some twisted sense of personal control. Margaret's voice quivered with emotion. "What if someone has a heart attack tomorrow?" she asked. "What then?" We all exchanged troubled glances, struggling for a solution. Every day without the AEDs was a day someone's life could be placed at risk. I recalled the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. Karen was doing precisely the opposite, willfully removing a tool vital to preserving life. With no immediate fix in sight, we decided our next steps would be to rally even more public awareness and force the HOA board's hand. We'd push for an official vote from the entire neighborhood to restore the devices, and we'd broadcast Karen's reckless actions to the broader community if necessary. The fight was on. Life seemed calmer in the days leading up to the special HOA meeting, too calm, like the lull before a storm. Karen stopped her random visits and had grown quieter online. The community buzzed with rumors that she was preparing a defensive strategy, but none of us anticipated the real scare that lay ahead. It happened on a mild Saturday afternoon. A group of us were relaxing at the community pool, chatting about the upcoming vote. The weather was perfect, warm sunshine, a pleasant breeze. Families splashed around while a few seniors sat in loungers, reading books. I was in a corner, reading an article on the latest heart valve technology on my phone, when I heard the scream. A teenage lifeguard shot up, shouting for help. An older man, Mr. Leonard Johnson, had collapsed near the water's edge. Pale and unresponsive, he looked to be in his late 60s. My instincts kicked in, and I rushed over. Kneeling by him, I quickly checked for a pulse. It was faint, disorganized. He was in cardiac arrest or close to it. "Somebody call 911. I yelled, already beginning chest compressions. The lifeguard scrambled for his phone. I barked out instructions for rescue breathing. My mind raced. In such scenarios, an AED was critical. "Where's the defibrillator?" I shouted, though I already knew the grim answer. The lifeguard's eyes went wide. "It used to be right there on the wall." He pointed to the empty bracket. My stomach churned. This was the scenario I had feared. With no AED on site, I continued CPR, hoping to keep blood flowing until paramedics arrived. Minutes felt like hours. The heat pressed in on me as I pumped Mr. Johnson's chest. Another neighbor tried to help with rescue breaths, tears streaking her face. By the time the ambulance arrived, Mr. Johnson was barely clinging to life. Paramedics zapped him with their portable defibrillator, then rushed him away. Later that day, I learned he survived the incident, just barely, but had to be hospitalized in critical condition. The doctors at the hospital told me that if an AED had been available poolside, he might have recovered more quickly or at least avoided certain complications. Word of Mr. Johnson's close call spread through Springfield Grove like wildfire. The timing couldn't have been more damning for Karen's stance. In removing the AEDs, she had placed every resident, particularly the elderly, at extreme risk. Even the few supporters she had left began to question her leadership. People were furious. Some talked about pressing charges if Mr. Johnson didn't pull through. My resolve hardened. Enough was enough. At the upcoming HOA meeting, I'd make sure the entire community knew the potential consequences of Karen's high-handed decision. If she still refused to budge, I was prepared to escalate legally and publicly. The special HOA meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday evening in the same clubhouse where Karen had once boasted about her authority. This time, it was packed to standing room only, neighbors lining the walls and clustered near the back. The atmosphere crackled with tension. Karen and her 3 board members sat at the long table, looking visibly uneasy. She rapped her gavel once, a bit too vigorously, and addressed the crowd. "Let's come to order," she said, her voice tight. Before she could launch into formalities, Franklin stood up, unannounced. "We're here to demand the immediate return of our AEDs," he declared. The crowd murmured in agreement, waves of anger and worry rippling through. Karen tried to maintain control. "We have an agenda, Franklin," she snapped. "We'll address that in due time." Another neighbor, Martha, shouted, "We want it addressed now. Mr. Johnson almost died at the pool. We're not waiting for your bureaucratic nonsense." As if on cue, I stood and locked eyes with Karen. "I'm Dr. Stephen Malone, and the entire community has a right to know why you unilaterally removed potentially life-saving equipment. We've submitted a petition. Over 100 signatures, Karen. That meets the threshold for an immediate vote. Are you planning to ignore that?" She swallowed, forcibly smoothing her pastel cardigan. The board and I have concerns about liability. These devices can malfunction. We can't risk a lawsuit if someone uses them incorrectly." "That's false," I countered sharply. "There are Good Samaritan laws protecting laypeople who use AEDs in emergencies. And these devices come with straightforward instructions any bystander can follow. You're lying to the community about legal liability." Karen's cheeks flushed. "I'm not lying. I'm protecting the HOA budget and the residents from potential pitfalls." She glanced at her board members for backup, but they avoided her gaze. "Protecting us? Mr. Johnson nearly died," an angry voice yelled from the back. I pressed forward. "Look, as the president of the State Cardiology Association, I assure you that if Mr. Johnson had had access to an AED, his chance of a swift recovery would have skyrocketed. Instead, we waited precious minutes for the ambulance, and he's now fighting complications in the ICU." A wave of agreement swept the room. Karen tried to interject, but I barreled on. "Furthermore, you used emergency reserves to repay the hospital's grant, circumventing their conditions on the defibrillators. That's questionable at best, illegal at worst. We have a paralegal who found irregularities in the process. You went behind everyone's back to remove these devices." Murmurs of "outrageous" and "she must resign" filled the air. Karen, cornered, clutched her binder. I was acting in the HOA's best financial interest. "We can't squander money on rarely used devices." A neighbor retorted bitterly, "It's not rarely used if it saves even one life. That's the point." An older woman shouted, "We want a new vote, and I say we want it now." Karen's last ally on the board, a timid man named Russell, cleared his throat. "Karen, we can't ignore this. Let's hold the vote." Karen shot him a glare, but with the entire room turned against her, she had no choice. "Fine," she spat. "All in favor of reinstating the AEDs, raise your hands." A sea of hands shot up, nearly everyone in the room. Karen gazed at the swarm of arms with a mix of fury and shock. It was done. By the clear majority mandated in the bylaws, the community had overruled her. A roar of applause and cheers filled the clubhouse. I caught Karen's gaze. Her expression was livid, her knuckles white on the gavel. The tide had turned. Despite the decisive community vote, Karen didn't move to reinstate the AEDs right away. She stalled, claiming shipping delays, insurance complications, and other excuses. But our newly galvanized committee wouldn't let her shirk the decision. We took the issue public. I contacted a local news station that ran a segment about the controversy in Springfield Grove. The anchor interviewed neighbors who voiced their outrage, referencing Mr. Johnson's incident as a prime example of why the devices were critical. They also interviewed me, and I explained the basic science of why immediate defibrillation can make the difference between life and death. The story went viral on social media. HOA president removes life-saving defibrillators, residents furious, read one headline. Within days, we received support from multiple healthcare advocacy groups. Even a state representative weighed in, tweeting that HOAs should not place residents' lives at risk over budget squabbles. Then, an unexpected ally emerged, St. Catherine's Hospital. The hospital's legal team was incensed when they learned how Karen had refunded the grant under questionable pretenses, effectively voiding the original arrangement. Their lawyers sent the HOA a stern letter, threatening legal action if the defibrillators weren't reinstated or if funds were misused. They also wanted a formal audit of the HOA's finances to ensure no other ethical violations had taken place. Karen was rapidly losing ground. Several board members resigned, citing her autocratic leadership style and fear of legal repercussions. The few who remained didn't dare cross the hospital or the State Cardiology Association. And then, as if matters couldn't get worse for Karen, the paralegal in our committee discovered more irregularities, signs that Karen might have been siphoning HOA funds for personal use under the guise of administrative expenses. By that point, even Karen's most loyal followers realized she was toxic. A recall petition circulated. Residents demanded she step down as HOA president. Desperately trying to save face, Karen agreed to hold a final emergency meeting. Little did she realize it would be the meeting that ended her hold on Springfield Grove for good and landed her in far deeper trouble. The emergency meeting took place on a sweltering summer evening in the same clubhouse that had witnessed so many of Karen's power plays. Only this time, the air was thick with anticipation that her days of ruling Springfield Grove were over. When Karen arrived, she looked strained but tried to keep a dignified posture. No pastel cardigan this time. She wore a professional blazer, as though hoping to command respect. But the hush that fell on the gathered residents was hostile, not reverent. She cleared her throat. "Residents of Springfield Grove," she began. "I understand there have been numerous concerns about the removal of defibrillators, as well as questions about our budget. I want to address them directly." Before she could say more, the clubhouse door opened, and two uniformed police officers entered, accompanied by a stern-faced woman in a tailored suit, someone from the local district attorney's office. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Karen's eyes went wide. What is this?" The DA's representative stepped forward, voice brisk. "Are you Mrs. Phoebe Arneson, also known as Karen, president of Springfield Grove HOA?" Karen nodded nervously. The officer read from a sheet of paper. "Ma'am, we have evidence of financial impropriety, specifically unauthorized use of HOA funds, and potential fraud related to the misappropriation of a hospital grant. We also have multiple sworn statements indicating you endangered the community by removing AEDs, ignoring a legally binding vote to reinstall them. You'll need to come with us for questioning." An explosion of shocked whispers filled the room. Some neighbors held their breath. Others looked vindicated. Karen spluttered, "This is outrageous." I was only." But the officers stepped forward, guiding her away from the podium. One of them added, "There may also be civil suits from the hospital and the residents. You're going to need legal counsel." The hush gave way to an excited murmur as Karen was escorted out, her once confident posture sagging with each step. Outside, a local news crew captured the moment she was placed in a squad car, doors slamming shut on her era of unbridled tyranny. Inside the clubhouse, the board's remaining members stood in stunned silence. Eventually, the DA's representative spoke calmly. "For the record, we recommend you appoint an interim president. We'll be in touch regarding the investigation." Karen's arrest rattled Springfield Grove. In the days that followed, details of her wrongdoing trickled out. She faced charges for fraud, misuse of community funds, and endangerment, the latter stemming from the removal of critical medical devices and ignoring the explicit community vote. The civil suits piled on, led by St. Catherine's Hospital for breach of grant conditions, and by multiple residents who argued that Karen's actions had imperiled lives. Local media devoured the story. HOA president arrested. Defibrillator removal scandal shocks suburb, read one headline. Photos of Karen being taken away in handcuffs circulated online. A local editorial scathingly noted, "When budget cuts undermine human lives, justice must intervene." With Karen gone, an interim HOA leadership was appointed. Their first official action was to hold an immediate vote to reinstate the AEDs using a portion of the funds recovered from Karen's unauthorized expenses. Within a week, brand new defibrillator cabinets were reinstalled in all the previous locations, and even a few new ones. The staff at St. Catherine's Hospital donated updated equipment and provided a quick training seminar for residents on how to use them. "Mr. Johnson, who'd nearly died at the pool, made a slow but steady recovery. When he returned home from the hospital, the entire neighborhood greeted him with cheers and relief. He expressed his gratitude to everyone who had fought to bring back the AEDs, and especially to me, though I felt my role was just part of a community-wide effort. As for Karen, her legal woes escalated. Investigators found that, indeed, she had used HOA money to fund her personal vacations and renovations to her home, a breach of fiduciary duty. A judge froze her assets, including her house in Springfield Grove, which went into foreclosure to cover part of her mounting legal fees and restitution. Facing overwhelming evidence, she eventually struck a plea deal but still received jail time. The judge, in a scathing statement, told her that abusing her authority to endanger lives for personal gain was a profound violation of both moral and legal standards. With Karen's downfall, Springfield Grove underwent a transformation. Freed from the stifling micromanagement, residents felt more empowered. The new HOA leadership focused on sensible, transparent governance. They encouraged block parties, neighborhood watch programs, and even organized a Heart Health Day, inviting staff from St. Catherine's Hospital for free blood pressure screenings and CPR lessons. The defibrillators now stood as symbols of the community's resilience. Bright, fully stocked boxes, safeguards against the unpredictability of life, each labeled with a heart-shaped logo that read, Springfield Grove Cares. In a short ceremony, neighbors gathered to thank the hospital staff and all those who fought to bring the AEDs back. I was invited to speak and use the moment to remind everyone how fragile life can be and how community support is essential. Standing at the newly reinstalled cabinet by the pool, I felt a swell of gratitude. Springfield Grove was no longer just a quiet suburban enclave for me. It had become a place where civic responsibility could triumph over selfish agendas, and where people recognized that public safety wasn't just a line item in a budget, it was a moral duty. Later, as I walked past Karen's former home, vacant and up for auction, I reflected on the nature of power. Her story was a cautionary tale. She had taken on the job of protecting the neighborhood, only to let arrogance and a twisted sense of control guide her actions. In the end, she lost everything, her position, her reputation, even her property, through the very legal and moral channels she'd tried to circumvent. Weeks turned into months, and Springfield Grove found a new normal. When I returned from a state cardiology conference one afternoon, I noticed a small sign taped near each AED cabinet, in partnership with Dr. Malone and the State Cardiology Association. I smiled, touched by the gesture. For all the chaos that Karen had caused, the resolution of the crisis reaffirmed my faith in collective action. One misguided, power-hungry individual might cause damage, but a united community, backed by ethical and legal support, could set things right. And so the story ended not in tragedy, but in a more deeply connected neighborhood, stronger for having stood together to defend a life-saving principle. As for Karen, she remained the whispered name everyone remembered, the Karen who tried to remove defibrillators and nearly cost a man his life, only to discover too late that there was a cardiologist in their midst, and that justice, like a well-timed electrical shock, could indeed jolt a failing system back into a healthier rhythm.